let us talk about the code that I'm going to give for Blackjack.
Who would be following along with you?
All of this code I'm going to post into Slack, so you don't have to copy down anything, but you're welcome to follow along however you like. But everything you see here is going to be given to you as I'm going to just give you these files. Basically, just going to drop the files into Slack, and you can copy, paste them into your code. So here's a super, super simple user interface. It's not done yet, right? It's not styled. All I've added to my interface so far is I know I'm going to have 2 buttons for the player to hit or stay. I'm going to have a list for the player's hand. I'm going to have a list for the dealer's hand. There's going to be a list for where the player's cards go and a list for where the dealer's cards go. You don't have to use this if you don't want to. If you'd rather come up with a different way of organizing them, awesome. This is not the only way to solve this problem. You can use divs, you can use sections, you can use articles, you can do anything you like. I'm just going to show you one example of using a list to hold the cards for the dealer, visual, and the cards for the player. So in the main.js, at the very top, I have made for you an array called deck that holds 52 objects. Just kind of like what we had when we were chatting before we broke. There's 52 of these that have a face, a value, and a suit. And it goes 2 through ace, 2 through 11, 2 through ace, 2 through ace, and 2 through ace. And this is manually creating a big old array of all of the cards. Now, optionally, this code here that's commented out would build the deck dynamically without having to specify every single card. So this starts out with a deck that's blank. It starts out with a list of the 4 suits and the 12 cards. 13 cards. Wait, no. 10, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 cards. 13 cards that are in each suit. Right? So these are the cards that are without suits. Right? So we've got 2 through ace, and this little double for loop builds up the deck. So this is for folks who want to see how to program something dynamically. We haven't talked about loops inside of loops. So if you're like, that blows my mind, you can just take this part of code that's commented out and delete it at a repository. You're like, cool, I want to investigate how that works. Get rid of this deck and use this instead. Right? So this works. It's just a big old list of 52 cards. Or use the commented out section here to build one up dynamically if you want to play around with that. So those are our cards. That's our deck of 52 cards. We're going to make 2 variables, one that stores a player hand and one that's going to store the dealer's hand. And they're both going to start out as empty arrays. Right? The dealer has no cards and the player has no cards. Inside the main, this little snippet of code here, I am granting to you all, and this little bit of code here will shuffle the cards. Every time your game runs, you'll end up with a different ordering of cards. If you're curious about how this code works, there's a link in here to the Fisher-Yates shuffle. And you can read about how that shuffle works, and this is the JavaScript code that implements a Fisher-Yates shuffle. So after this little snippet of code, if I console log the deck, let's see what happens here in the console. Let's see what our deck looks like. This is probably too big. Hey, it's an array of 52 elements. Seems about right. And it's the king of hearts, the 8 of diamonds, the 7 of diamonds. Now it is the queen of diamonds, the 10 of spades, the 8 of spades. Now it is the 5 of diamonds, the ace of spades, the 3 of hearts. So every time we run our program, our array that is a deck will still have 52 cards in it, but they'll be in some random order. So this means we now have a deck of cards that is in a random order. So now it's time to deal some cards to the player. Let's use a for loop. How many cards does the player get at first? 2. So let's make a little for loop. So it's going to go twice. And we said the way that we get a card from the deck is to call pop. Let's check our work. Let's just console log the card. And then let's move this console log the deck afterwards. So how many different cards should print out? 2. And then how many elements should be left in deck when we're done? 50. Let's see if that's true. Hey, here's our first card. Here's our second card, and we have 50 cards left in the deck. So we've pulled 2 random cards. Let's see if they're random, right? 5 of hearts, jack of diamonds, 3 of clubs, king of hearts, jack of clubs, king of clubs. Right? We've got 2 random cards. Cool. So we can get rid of our console log since we know this is working. What do we do once we have the card? Where does it need to go? To the player hand. Yeah. So if player hand is our array, what method are we going to use to put that card, that object, inside of that array? Push. So we pop the card off of the deck, and we push the card into the player's hand 2 times. So I log the player hand now. It should be, what kind of object should it be? And it should have how many elements? 2. Let's see. Hey, here's the player hand, and it's got a 7 of spades and a king of something. And now it's got a 2 of diamonds and a 9 of clubs. Perfect. That's what we'd expect. Right? We've used a loop now to pop and push a card. But really what we want to happen is we're not going to play the game here in the console. We want to see the cards in our user interface. So what do we have to do here is we have to add this card to the user interface. We're going to do that by finding the UL for the player hand, create a new LI, make the text of the LI say be the description of the card, append that LI to the UL. This is the algorithm, this is the recipe for now not only taking that card and putting it in the player's hand array, but also adding something to the user interface so that we can see it. So let's do this step once above the loop. We don't need to find the UL every time. So we can say something like player hand list is document query selector for what? Let's go look at our HTML. Well, here's ULs, but I very carefully put some classes on them to distinguish them. So we're going to look for, in our JavaScript, we're going to look for the selector as a string, player hand. Let's console log player hand list and see if that works out to be what we want it to be. So here it is. Yep, it's kind of showing the player hand. Maybe what we want to do is put something in here that we can see it. And let's put an LI inside of here so we can visually see it. Yeah, that's the player's hand. So we found the player hand. We did that right. We just learned that we can say something like new card item is document create element. Let's make an LI appear out of thin air. Then let's take the new card item's text content and make it equal to an interpolated string that says the. Now where am I going to get the face value from?
The object?
Yeah, which object? Somebody else. Nope. So what did I just pull off of the deck? Card. Right? And what attribute does the card have? A face. Right? If you're curious, right, we can just say something like console log card and see what's inside of card. Hey, there's the card. It's got a face. We can say the card face of card soup. So now we're building that LI. Remember, when we create an element, it's not part of our document yet. It's kind of floating off on the side like a scratch land, about to be on deck, right? It's like the Tetris piece that hasn't been dropped in, right? It kind of shows you preview. Let's take the player hand list and append the child of the new card item. Hey, the player has the king of spades and the seven of hearts. So now our player hand array has the two cards in it here. Right? The king of spades and the seven of hearts. They're in the array, but they're also on the screen. So the user knows what the heck's going on. Cool. That seems about right. So that's building a deck, shuffling it, and then pulling two cards out of that deck, putting them in the player's hand, and then adding them to the display. Let's talk about making the hit work. Let's make the hit function work. So in order to make the hit function work, let's find the hit button, add an event listener on click that does what? What are we going to do when we hit? Pop another card. Yeah, push it to the hand. And what else do we need to do? What did we do before?
Oh yeah, create the list item.
Yeah, we need to update the interface. What kind of needs to do this? Well, let's do this. We know how to do this. Let the hit button be document query selector for, what does my interface have? Has a button hit. Let's add an event listener. Add event listener on click. It's going to call a function. Let's call that function deal card to player. I haven't written this function yet, so let's go write it. And that's going to go up here above main. Let const deal card to player is a function. Is our function. Back down here was a description of what it needs to do. Right? Pop a card, push in the hand, add it to the interface. Let's put the description up here. Oops. I lost my copy and paste. Okay, let's go to deal card to player and put the description inside of here. Pop a card, push it to the hand, add a card to the interface. Well, isn't that just all of this? Right? We've already done that. This does it twice. Let's copy this card information. Let's paste it here. Deal card to player. It's exactly the same thing we were doing in our loop before. Right? We just want to have that happen when we click. So let's see what happens if I hit. Oops, and I'm missing one thing. I need the player hand list. I need the player hand list up here. Right. We also need to have the player hand list as well, because that's where it's going to get added to. Now when I hit, right, I'm just getting an infinite list of cards. Right. I can keep doing this 52 times until I run out. But this seems kind of duplicated, right? I have the same code here that I have down here. So if I want to, I can just replace all of this with a call to what? Now I just have one place in my code that knows how to deal a card to the player, and I can read this code without even knowing how deal card to player works. I see a loop that happens 2 times, and what does it do? It deals a card to a player. Without even knowing how deal card to player works, I can take a guess at what it probably does. Then I can see that when I click on the hit button, it's going to do whatever deal card to player does. This is the idea of reusing the code, right? Having one place in the code that does one thing. This one function up here deals one card to the player. I can use it in 2 different places. I can use it to build their initial hand, and I can use it to add a card to their hand when they're ready. If I change this 2 to a 5, right, they just start with 5 cards. That's not how Blackjack is played, but there we go. So I'm going to leave it up to you all. Oh, I don't need this code up here anymore either. To make this work with images if you want. In the homework and on the handbook, there's going to be a link to those SVG images I was using. You're welcome to use those or other images. I would just be cautious of using really big images, because that will make your GitHub page really big, and it'll make search kind of slow. So maybe try and use the ones that I have, and they're vector, so they'll scale really nicely to small to big. So maybe instead of having text, see if you can make those images by creating image elements. Then you need to figure out, well, how it happens every time I hit. It'd be nice to display the value of my hand. Right now the value of my hand is 16, right? So somehow we've got to be able to total up the value of my hand and show that on the interface, because I don't have to count them, right? And when we hit stay, it's up to you all to work out what's the logic that happens now for the dealer, right? That's described in the rules of Blackjack that we want you to implement in the homework. And just like Rochambeau, show a winner and show a loser, right? Based on the rules of 21. Cool. So you don't have to use this starting code, but I'm gonna drop it in Slack for everyone. You're welcome to start with this. You're welcome to redo this in a different way if you want to move the buttons around, right? Don't use ULs if you don't want to. Use something else. You're not locked into anything. But at least you have the beginning of the deck and the shuffling code. So every time you start, you'll have a shuffled set of cards. Question? Done?
Can you help me understand why some things are going in the main function and why some things aren't?
Yeah. So generally, new functions that we're writing, we just want them to be siblings of main. So the main function is what happens after the DOM is loaded, but before we give interaction to the user. That's what the DOM content loaded main here does. So we could define these other functions inside of main. Just in terms of stylistic things, we make those new functions outside of main. So those are functions we can call from main to the other function.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, the functions outside of main aren't automatically called when the page loads.
Correct. The only thing that's called automatically is main. So for instance, this deal card to player happens 2 times because we're calling it twice. This deal card to player is just the name of the function that we're telling the button to do when clicked, so we don't call it here. So all of the code in main is run. We shuffle the deck. We loop 2 times to deal a card to a player, actually, and then we say, hey, when it's time to click on the hit button, this is the function to call. And we just tend to define those functions outside. We could define those functions inside of main, but that's a little bit of an advanced topic that we're not quite ready to talk about. So for now, we're just going to keep defining all of our functions outside. That's why.
Is there a reason, since a few times now I've seen the main function at the bottom and work our way up and then kind of back down. Is there any reasons for that? Could you do like the 2 card hands up top and then the main right under it and everything under it?
Yeah. As long as a function is declared before it's used, it doesn't matter. They have to be. You have to have a function declared before you can use it. Since we're guaranteed not to run anything until main happens, we can put them in any order we like. I just think this is general style that you want to try and keep. Since we're calling main here and this main's here, tend to put the main thing at the bottom. If I want to see how the program starts, I just scan to the bottom of the file. Okay, that's where it goes. Or you've got to put the main all the way at the top and everything below it. But since we're doing things like the main would have to show up like around here, and it would just be hard to find. So that's why we tend to have the main at the bottom and kind of stack things on top of it. Week after next, we're going to learn how to separate these things into separate files. So kind of your main is going to be on one file and your decks are going to be on another file. So you kind of organize your code instead of just stacking it all on top of one file. But we're not quite ready to do that yet either. So soon we won't have more than one thing per file. It'll just be a lot easier to organize, and we won't have this stacking question anymore. So we're only going to have this stacking question for this week and next. Cool. Any other questions on the Blackjack? So my general suggestion is to kind of flow it the same way we flowed Rochambeau. Build out the user interface first, then sit down and write out what you think the instructions are for stay. If there's anything more for hit you need it to do, like keep track of the total value of the hand, see if you can write down the instructions for those things. How would you go through the array of the player hand? Don't answer me now. How would you write down the instructions that says, hey, if I have this array, how can I go through it and total up the total value of that hand? See if you can write that out on paper first. And then see if you can go line by line and convert that into code. Right? That's the practice of kind of thinking through the algorithm and then coming up with a code that goes with it. And we're gonna do a practice tomorrow to reinforce that. Same thing is going to be true for stay. What does stay actually have to do? When the user clicks stay, what are all the things that have to happen? See if you can write them out first, and then come back and write the code. Even if you just copy and paste them, or if you work on a whiteboard, copy them into your code and see if you can use that as the guiding thing that steps you through. But I will, once I stop the video, I will dump this code into Slack, and I think, hopefully, the handbook has been updated because I just dropped the yes. So if you click here, you should get a download of a zip file that has cards, all the cards in it, and I discuss how to get those images into your project if you decide to go the image route. Yes, it'll be in GitHub also, but you can just download it straight from here. Cool. So I will stop this one video.